Okay, today I'm going to be colouring this sketch cover of my comic Flying Tigers. This cover features main character Harli and her girlfriend Storm. And if you're wondering why the cover's on a bit of an angle, that's because this little batch of covers I got printed, they kind of printed them a little bit off angle. You can see it a lot better if I flip to the page of the comic. Not really lined up well, but it is what it is, so that's what we've got to work with. So for non-digital art like this, I primarily work in copic markers, and my colouring system is pretty basic, what I refer to as the 3 marker system. So when it comes to skin tones, what you want to do is pick whatever your primary skin tone is. For Harli, since she is the golden tan surfer girl type character, I go with YR00 as the primary skin tone. So what I want to do now is I pick a dark tone. In this case, I go with YR02 for the dark tone, and then YR000 for the highlight soft tones blending. And I also use a few other colors just to add some blush and some pinky tones to places where, well, it fits. So with the triple marker method, I start with the darker tone first, the YR02 in this case. And basically we're just using it to add anywhere that there's going to be shadows or darker tones of the skin. Now, normally you'd be thinking of where the light source is coming from, but unless I've got something specific in mind or going for a specific effect, I tend to go with what I refer to as studio lighting, which is basically, just want to make it all look more or less direct on. So after we got the dark tones in, this is when we switch to the main skin tone, the YR00, and we're going to blend in the dark tones as we go, but also we're leaving some space for where the light tones are going to go later. And just try and get this to look right. I will admit that drawing in this particular setup that I've got for the camera is a little bit awkward for me, still getting used to it. But here we go. Basically with the main tone, we want to leave some gaps for where the skin's going to be lighter from highlights and also just general variation in skin tone. So at this point, this is where I put down the first layer of the blush for the cheeks. With this one, we're using the E93. And we're going to be going over where the highlights are, because it's all getting blended. And just get a rough, nice rosy cheeks going in here. You could go more for the more accurate cheekbone looks, if you like, but I tend to have this style with these big rosy cheeks. So now that we've got that in, we'll be switching to the soft tone, the highlight tone, which is the YR000, which is really not focusing. And now we just go over everything again, because not only is this going to be the highlight tone, the light tone, it is also being used to blend the other colors together. Some people who use copic markers or other alcohol markers will use blender markers. Typically, they're colorless alcohol markers to blend with, but honestly, if you use the light tone of your skin mix or any color mix is, it works just as well to blend it together and actually adds to the tone instead of diluting the tone like you would if you're using a colorless blender. Okay, so we've got all that in. So at this point, with the skin tone, this is where I go for the secondary blush, which is the R02, which used to be called Flesh, but is now called Rose Salmon. And we're just going to go on the top of the cheeks and just add a little line on the top of the cheeks. Okay, and that's basically how I go with the skin tone. Now I'm going to switch to time lapse to color the rest of this, and then I'll get on with the next step. Okay, now that I've got Harley's skin tones all done, gonna do Storm's. Now Storm has a pale pink skin tone to her, so the primary skin tone I'm using for Storm is the R000, the cherry white they call it, with the darker tone being the R01, and for the pale tone, the light tone, we're using the R40. Again, same process, start with the dark tone, and because of her hair covering a lot more, it's going to be a bit more dark tone, a bit more shadows coming through here. Same thing, always go a little bit over the previous color just to blend it a tad bit more. Unfortunately, I will say that the material, the paper of these sketch covers, isn't quite as smooth or blendy as I would like, but it does an adequate job. Certainly have colored on worse ones before. In fact, there's certainly some commercial released sketch covers that are more like coloring on plastic than paper. So again, we're adding the blush to Storm's cheeks here. And then with our lightest tone, just go in and blend. Well, with a paler skin tone like this, there doesn't appear as much variation between the normal tone and the lighter tone, but that's just how things work out. And just because it's kind of muted the shadows a little bit, I'm just going to go over some of the shadows again with the R01. For anyone who's never colored with alcohol markers before, you will notice that at first when you're putting down the colors, they do seem faded a little bit. That's because of the alcohol actually taking a little time. It soaks into the paper, and as the alcohol evaporates, it leaves the pigment behind. Okay, so there we've got Storm's face done. We're going to switch to time lapse and finish coloring the rest of our skin tones. Okay, now I'm just going to finish off the coloring for the rest of the faces, which is the lipstick, eyeshadow, and of course the eyes themselves. So, just start with Harley. Just going in with the BV11. I'm just going both over where I've left the white space to go over, but also a little bit over the skin tone as well, just to blend things in. And then just the RV21 for the lips. Now for the eyes, similar concept to with the skin. We have the main color, the primary color for the eyes, which for Harli is the BG01. This nice light blue-green color. So of course we then need a darker color for the shadows, which is the BG09. And then I've got the BG000 for the highlight. Also with the eyes lately, especially when I'm drawing on a larger scale, add just a slight bit of a different color tone, just to add a little bit of a highlight or an eye catch to it. In this case I'm going with the YG01. So for the eyes, just starting with the BG01 here, and I want to leave about a third of the bottom of the eye white. Just go over it a couple times just to make sure I get the color in nice. Okay, and this is where you come with the lighter tone, and you just want to sort of color from the inside of that white space and just a little bit over the edges. You want to be pushing the lighter tone into the darker tone, as opposed to earlier when we were doing the other way around. And then we come with the shadow, and just across the top of the eye. Now if you wanted to get fancy, you could also come in with a light grey colour and go across the top of the white of the eyes. But at this scale, I probably wouldn't worry about it. And then I'm just going to come back with that YG01 and just add a spot of this light green just on the outside of the eyes there. And then later, after the ink is set a little bit, I'll come back with a white pen and add in some white highlights to the eyes. But for now, we'll skip across to Storm. Again, just doing the eyeshadows for Storm. Using the YG11, this nice pale yellow-green, or green-yellow colour, just across the top of the eyes. And then we've got the BV17, a nice dark blue-violet colour. And there we go. Now Storm's eye colours is a nice bright green colour. So for the primary colour, I'm going with the YG06. Highlight, I'm going for a YG03. And for the dark tones, I'm going with the YG09. And just using a little Y15 for the highlight as well. Again, same process. Just leaving a little bit at the bottom. Like I said, about a third of the eye at the bottom. Maybe a quarter. And just because the hair's covering a good part of her eye on this side, I'm just going to leave it a little bit off to the side. And again, you want to be colouring across. And I think I'm just going to go over the original YG06 again. Like I said, this paper on these sketch covers is a little bit different to the paper I'm used to. So it's blending a little bit lighter than I would normally expect, which is something you'll learn with using, well, any medium really, but with alcohol markers, it really does depend on what kind of paper you're using to what kind of effect it's going to give. So I tend to find in the past that if you use something like bleed-proof marker paper, it will really wash out the colors. Okay, to be honest here, I'm not happy with how light the colors coming, so I'm just going to grab G28, I think, which is a really dark green, and I'm just going to go over the top of that shadow. Just okay, that's a lot better, that one. Okay. And also I'm going to redo her eyeshadow. I'm going to use the YG03 that I was using for the lights of the eyes. Maybe I should have swapped those colors around, but live and learn. Okay. So again, I'm going to let that set a little bit before I come back with a white pen for the highlights in the eyes. So next step from this point would be to go with the hair and then the swimsuits. So I'll be back in a moment. And I'm back. I just had to grab all the markers I needed for this set. So again, we're going on to the hair with the same 3 marker color principle. So for Harley, we're starting with the dark tone of Y38. And with the hair, just want to sort of just do nice little flicky motions. Just sort of imitate the texture of the hair as you go. When you're starting with the dark tone, leaving lots and lots and lots of space. Now this is one of the parts that's really awkward for me in this camera setup I've got, because I'm so used to rotating around the paper so I can color from a more comfortable position. Whereas with this camera setup, I kind of have to cross over like this, and it's a little awkward. But again, you see the basic idea, just adding some nice color, just keeping that flicky motion to it. And we're just going over the top of the dark tone now with the main tone, which is a Y35. And with Harley, she is one of the very few characters that I actually give colored eyebrows to. Most of them I just ink them in black. But for Harley and a few other characters with these thicker eyebrows, I do give color. Just use this same main tone as I do for the hair. Don't worry too much about any texture on the eyebrows, because same as with just being inked normally. Okay. So now normally when I do this 3 marker color method, I stick within the same color family, so it would typically be the Y35, Y38, and I believe I have Y32. But just to give it a little bit more warmth, a little bit more shine, I'm actually going to use the Y11 instead. And again, just the same flicky method. You're just pushing a little bit of the previous colors across with it. And again, you want to leave some highlights there. So we'll move on to Storm now. Starting with the dark tones, in this case, the VO9 Violet. And again, with her hair covering a lot, going to add a lot more shadows in the back of the hair. Now for Storm with the wavy hair, it's a little bit different to the flicky motions on the other. Don't be afraid to move around a lot as you colour. Just find the right places as you go. I know on social media there will be lots of people who will show you how they're doing it and it looks perfect. Like they know absolutely what they're doing and it's very... Sorry, I just got distracted by something. It's... Never mind. My point was that just because you see other people on social media posting this seemingly perfect, flawless technique doesn't mean that's 100% how they're actually doing it. Some people are just very good at doing things on camera. And it's art, so don't be afraid to be a little bit messy, a little bit uncoordinated as you do it. All that really matters is getting where you want to get in the end. So, anyway, with the main tone now, the VO6 Lavender. One thing I should say about Copic markers is that they do, from time to time, change the names of the colours. So, if you're getting into Copic markers for the first time, it's best to just stick with the actual letter number codes. In fact, a few years back, they quite famously changed a lot of their colours that had names like skin or flesh to them because, well, it had the obvious connotations that it was all Caucasian skin colours. So anyway, we're going to the highlight now, and we're using the RV02. And same as before, just want to push some of that other colour with it. Now, as I keep saying, the paper for these sketch covers is not quite what I'm used to. Personally, I prefer a nice smooth Bristol paper. You can see the texture of the paper for this cover as I'm going, especially with these purples here, you can see the texture showing through, but it still looks good enough. Okay, so that's Storm. Oh, just a little bit more there. So that's Storm's hair color done. Notice I didn't add any highlights to the underside where it's shadowed. Left that as darker as I could. So now we got more or less the final step for the colouring right now will be the swimsuits. And for those, I'm going to be using the character's signature colours. So for Harley, we've got the blue-violet colours, which is, we got the BV13 as the main, the BV17 as the dark colour, and the BV11 as the highlights. And for Storm, going with the red-violet colours, so we've got RV19 for a darker colour, RV17 for the main, RV14, and I might need to go with some RV11 just in case. I'm not sure. We'll see how it works out. Anyway, I'll switch the camera to a little bit wider now. And again, same concept the entire way through. 3-color method, 3-marker method. Starting with the dark color, where we expect there to be shadows or darker tones. And this is another part that would be a lot easier if I wasn't trying to do it on camera and could move the page around. I will say, for any beginner or just starting out, just learning artists, don't handicap yourself by getting too used to turning the page around. Believe me, once you've got that habit completely ingrained in you, it is very, very hard to break it. So going with the BV13 for the midtones. And same as before, we're just using each consecutive marker to blend in the tone of the marker before it. And now the BV11. Okay, just to make the colors a little bit richer, I'm just going to go over some of it again with the BV13. Which is another good lesson for working with, well, really any medium, but because I work with markers, I'll just say working with markers. Don't be afraid to go over again, to touch up, to change as you go. Again, don't be fooled by people online who make things look as if it's perfect first attempt. Just focus on creating. Focus on trying to make the best piece of work you can make at the time. And remember, every piece you work on is another step to improving. So we'll move on to Storm now. So YV19 for the darkest tones, and we'll just start with a little behind the neck here, and just a little where it joins up there. Always try to think somewhat of where the shadows are or where things are going to be a little bit darker, and even if you're not concentrating on shadows specifically, think of where you'd add a darker tone just to add volume to the picture as well. Which is kind of what I do with this, as I called it, studio lighting method. I'm not really concentrating on shadows as much as I am concentrating on creating some volume. Okay. And just YV17 now. And since this is kind of similar, a little too similar to the YV19, it's not going to be the primary tone for this one, but I don't know why I pronounce primary like that, but I will be just using it sort of as a secondary dark tone, to be honest. Which is why I thought I might need the RV11. I think I just called it the YV before, but here we go. Anyway, onto the RV14, which is now our main tone. And again, just leaving a little bit of highlight there. Oops. We can fix that later. That's the other thing. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. You're gonna make them. That is part and parcel of the whole artist gig. Phenomenal drawing powers, itty bitty fuck ups. Okay, and just now I've got the RV11, and I'm just going to push in from all the other colours. And I'll probably go back over a bit again with the RV14. Okay. Most of the Copic colour families do have a nice good mix to them, but these RV1 colours are a little bit disjointed. Okay, there we go, just richening up the tones a little bit more. And before I finish the rest of the swimsuit, I'm just going to go back to the R000 just to blend out this mistake a little bit here. I mean, it won't be 100% perfect blend out, but again, mistakes happen, don't beat yourself up about them. Okay, so for the rest of her swimsuit, I'm just going to add a little black to this frill that I've got here. And I'm going to go over that black with a C7. And that is the end of the colouring portion. All that's left now is going through with some white pens to add in some highlights in a few places. And maybe add some colour wash to the back. I haven't decided yet.